Hello, welcome to the Agunze Chib Ikopu Foundation channel. The acronym is ASIF. So we're on ASIF series based on the book Learning About Ndi Igbo. This will enable us to showcase the pristine culture of the Igbo people, and ours is to send it out to the global community so they know whom we are. But joining me for today will be my daughter, Adanna Oforum. Adanna is a mother of three. Does she look it? She's a mother of three. She's professionally speaking, a chartered accountant, both in the UK, where she graduated from, and a CPA here in America. Welcome.
Thank you, Daddy. You're doing great. This is a great channel. I love it.
Thank you very much. So, look, this thing we're doing has very much in mind the younger generation, especially those in diaspora. And when I talk of diaspora, I need to split it. Local diaspora in Nigeria, which means outside the southeast, which is the home base of Igbos, and the rest of Nigeria and Africa, and then those abroad, like here.
Right.
And the disconnect is more like for those here, understandably, more so those that were born here as first generation Igbo Americans. We now have second generation Igbo Americans, and the need to connect is understandable. So I'm going to let you ask your questions, and I'll try as best as is possible to answer them.
Okay. No, you're so right. A lot of us who are here in the diaspora, we do have questions. I think there is a slight disconnect, like you mentioned, between, the tradition that we saw when we went to the village every Christmas. And, now that we've left when we were, 15, 14 years old and came here, there is a slight disconnect where little things like during a wedding, what do we do? During a funeral, what do we do? And I'm so glad that you've done series on that to re-educate us and to sort of give us a pathway and a foundation to how we move forward. One of the topics that usually comes up with us, our friends, and even with myself is around Biafra. I know that it's a perhaps sore topic to get into because it was real. The experiences are real. They're personal to you all. And I would love to be educated. I think education and lessons on Biafra are few and far between. When you read our history books, we don't see anything about that. We barely read anything about Biafra in our social studies in primary or secondary school. And I understand that maybe because some of the parties are still alive, maybe. But I would love us to just go into the topic of Biafra. I know there's a long history of what led to it, what happened during, and what happened post. So I would love if you could maybe start with, perhaps the British coming to Nigeria and what part they played in colonizing Nigeria, why they did that, and how that maybe led to Biafra.
Okay, Adanna. We've never really talked about this, and for obvious reasons, because it can be emotional. Like you said, it was real.
Right.
So for most people that participated in it, that were not really in the military before all of that, it took a lot of beating seeing what happened then. Okay, it's been 54 years,
Wow, yeah, 1960.
since the war ended
Right.
on January 15, 1970. So, all right, for the benefit of you all, I'll try my honest best to delve into a bit of history.
Okay.
Biafra just did not happen. Like in insurance law, they'll talk about approximate cause. So you need to know what led to what that then brought about the final peril, so to say. So you talked about the British. I think that's a fair way to start. Okay, now the slave trade ended about 1807. And that meant a primary source of income for the people of Great Britain had come to an end. One of the Igbo slaves, freed Igbo slaves from Iseke in Anambra, Olaudah Ekwuano, was very instrumental as one of the abolitionists of slavery in the UK. Okay, now by 1807, the revenue tap dried up. But then that was also industrial Britain coming to fore. So now the issue became that of what was going to be the alternative income source. And so Africa and her resources became a connoisseur of sorts for the British merchants. And the exploration started. So bear in mind that there was nothing like the entity called Nigeria as you know it. It wasn't there.
Interesting.
Yes, it wasn't. So by 1850, the British had developed great interest in some of the resources of the geographical area, comprising of palm oil, palm kernel, tin, cocoa, and things like that. It drove their interest. The traders, championed by a gentleman called Taubman Goldie, was in the forefront.
Okay.
These things were not so easy. It wasn't so interesting for the British explorers because guess what? Mosquito. There was no cure for malaria. And so they stayed offshore. And only a few ventured in, but not successfully. At least not in the tropical rainforest zone. So they left it for the adventurous traders to do all of that job. But that 1850, the cure for malaria, quinine, was discovered. And once quinine came on the scene, deeper exploration of the territory known as Southern Nigeria, more so the East, started taking place.
The most bitter drug in the world.
Yes, it is amazing. But you see, that's right. Yeah. So these are the connections people wouldn't ordinarily make.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. Now, so the British interest, therefore, was primarily that of commerce. It was trade. And we are now talking the 19th century. It was trade. With the Queen, they now went into exploration of the hinterlands. And naturally, it led to politics because they now used their trade policies to influence local politics. And very quickly, towards the end of the 19th century, most European countries, mostly France, Britain, Germany, Portugal, and so had delved into Africa. Okay. Much later, Belgium under King Leopold also moved in the Congos. So Europeans were now struggling for African territories, and they were willing to do damage to themselves in that pursuit. And so at that time, 1884, the Chancellor of Germany, Bismarck, thought, look, this is enough. Let's call a conference. And so in Berlin, 1884 to 1885, that conference took place amongst what you now call the colonialists. And in that conference, they said, look, let's be gentlemen. If you've got enough treaties for any particular land area, please let's sketch it out. And so they sketched out some section all over, and it's called now the partitioning of Africa. So this partitioning was based on, say, like traders, merchants like Goldie, whom I mentioned, showing agreements and treaties signed with illiterate chiefs, thumb printing with illiterate chiefs who didn't know naught about what they were doing.
Right.
Yes. But then that's how he got to control the area, at least in the Niger Delta area. Britain, from the Berlin Conference, therefore got Nigeria, what became Nigeria. And they sent Lord Lugard to the Northern Protectorate. Now, Lord Lugard had been appointed the High Consul of the two protectorates, North and South. And he had a single assignment to unite this entity, again, for resource control.
Entity being Nigeria?
That became Nigeria.
Okay.
Well, you'll be looking at it as the colony in Southern Protectorate and the Northern Protectorate.
Okay.
Now, after the Berlin Conference, they became a little bit bolder now in dealing with any form of opposition. And so, certain kings that had resisted this British incursion were dealt with. The Igbo king from Igbo, who ended up as a slave in Bonny, became a high person in the family of Anne Pepple, ended up in Opobo, establishing the kingdom of Opobo, and became the first king, Amanyanabo of Opobo, King Jaja.
Oh, Jaja of Opobo.
That's correct. Okay. Erudite businessman, sharp. Igbo boy, who therefore, because he spoke the language, he went at about age 12, they took him. But not slavery as we know it. No, this one is you walk up the ranks and be a free man, and they don't subjugate you or humiliate you. So his knowledge of Igbo, when he could deal with the hinterlands, I said it was from Igbo in Imo. And when he got turmoil and resisted any other person finding his route, so he sold to the British. And when the British became too clever for him, he outmaneuvered them and dealt directly with British industries, merchants. So direct, they couldn't take it. They just could not take it. He was deceived into the English Goshawk, a warship for discussion. And that was the first kidnapping.
Wow.
Yes, that's it. They took him to Barbados, to UK, then Barbados.
Wow.
And he was asked eventually they let him come back, but he didn't make it back to Pobo. He died and was buried in Tenerife. Eventually, he was exhumed and buried and given a 15th burial in Opobo. But that was Jaja of Opobo. That's how they dealt with him.
Wow.
There's King Koko, who fought them with his war canoes, 1,500 foot soldiers, beat Goldie, who had then formed the Royal Niger Company. Royal because he got the Royal Charter that now enabled him to form a constabulary, the police, and to therefore protect his goods.
Right.
And whereas he went hinterland, now Koko fought him hands down in Akasa Brass in the Yenegua area as of today. Again, Koko died, but this was 1895. 3 years later, he was dead.
Wow.
They said probably committed suicide. Don't know, but he died. Oba Overawen of Benin, the great Benin Empire. Oba Overawen was sacked in 1897. Now, grab the picture. All this now within a decade.
Right.
They were now eliminating all opposition.
Right.
All opposition. It took away Overawen, exiled him to Calabar, where he stayed and died in 1914, I believe. And all the bronze artifacts of Benin Kingdom, 500 years, were carted away, looted. It's a point of discussion now with the present Oba and government to bring them back.
From Britain.
From Britain and others. The Great Wall of Benin destroyed. They decimated Benin.
And all of this for resources.
All of this for control of resources.
Which still happens till today.
Well, that's why we're going back in history to see this build-up.
Right.
Okay. Now, having so done, there was that one last enclave, the Easterners were the most resistant. But it ended in 1902, the Anglo-Aro War, the Arochukwu, the Aro people of Arochukwu. And that particular war started in November 1901, ended mid-1902, and with the destruction and decimation of the Anglo-Aro War, brought the last resistance to an end. 1914, Lord Lugard had achieved the purpose of amalgamating the Northern Protectorate with the Southern Protectorate, and the name Nigeria was coined by a girlfriend that later became a wife, Flora Shaw, from the River Niger. That's how Nigeria came to be.
And the Niger Company as well.
The Royal Niger, the Royal Niger Company you just mentioned, in 1897, thereabouts. You know what happened? Was bought off by the British government from Goldie, Tubman Goldie. So they paid for all of that territory with the sum of £865,000. So Nigeria was a commodity, and it cost £865,000.
Wow.
And that's it. So Tubman gave up the Royal Charter, and it now went squarely to the British government, the territory, and all the rights and privileges. Why did that happen? Because, you had the Germans in the Cameroon, and you had the French. So east and west, north, south of Nigeria, you had the French, the Germans, and they were closing in, and there was no way Tubman could fight them.
Right.
So they needed to set him aside, settle him in that palace, and then took over and formed their own military. Now, it's with this sort of military that punitive exercises, actions started taking place. And that's how they ended up consolidating their colonialism over Nigeria, where they didn't do it by force. They were wise enough also to send in missionaries who softened the ground with their Christianity and education. Very soft.
Yeah.
Yes. But between the two, they balanced out their need to control the resources of the people. So by 1914, therefore, Nigeria had come to be with the British government thoroughly in command. That's where we are, 1914.
1914. It's quite the history. I know we tend to hear a lot of, snippets here and there about the Niger Company, the amalgamation, bringing it all together. So it's nice to have gone down the timeline.
Yes. Now, now they had the North, they had the South. It was now one country, Nigeria. So, were they the same people, culturally, linguistically? The answer is no. But here they are, now one people. So how do you administer people with such cultural, spiritual, and ethnic differences? But the British were clever. They were very clever. They didn't have the personnel to manage such a vast territory, but they did their best, understanding local dynamics. Yes. So in the South, it was a little bit difficult, but in the North, not so, because the North already had their emirate system. So they had a system of governance and maintaining of rule and order. So all they did, the British, was to recognize that system, allowing them, therefore, to be governed under the indirect rule.
Okay.
In the South, it wasn't so easy, and to replicate this system up north, they created the warrant chiefs, which wasn't exactly how the Igbos administered themselves. No.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Did people recognize themselves as Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa prior to the British coming in? Or did they maybe recognize themselves as, I don't know, like just by their villages? Because, again, you have all these different tribes and countries or states coming together to form Nigeria, but what were they known for prior? Or were these names given to them by the British?
Igbos. And Igbos dating back thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And this is not just gainsaying, because we now have archaeological findings to prove that very many thousands of years back, we're already skilled in the art of metallurgy.
Right.
The bronze works of Ibupu, for instance, carbon dating puts them at 7 AD. That's not when they learnt the technology. That's when these things were made. Okay, so the Igbos are very ancient in creation, and the current Oni of Ife said that much himself. So this is not me talking. He said, let the truth be told. The Igbos have always been there from creation. And it is known in Ife Oracle that they have the gift of commerce, God-given. So we're talking about an ancient people. And the one thing you don't allow is for Eurocentric writers to use ethnocentric views to define whom you are. Okay, because they'll always talk of their culture as being superior. That's the perception, that's the prism. Well, we don't allow that anymore. So, yes, we were all different ethnic nationalities, and in their governance, therefore, it became clear after 1914, going down to 1960, that they needed to have some constitutional proviso to recognize these very features we are talking about. And so it's there with the Constitution of the 1914 amalgamation. Then they had the, I think it was the next one was 1922, Clifford. All these were administrative heads, British, all these names, to begin to define elective positions, for our people. Then they had the 1922 Clifford Constitution that started giving room for political activities. And that's when you see having this Ndi Igbo, Herbert Macaulay, and what have you come into play. Okay, that led to the formation of political parties, NCNC, Action Group, and so what. Then the Richards Constitution of 1946, it was getting more and more better cultivated, allowing for these views of the ethnic nationalities and the new parties to play up. So that refined the political structures. That's that 1946 Richards Constitution. The 1951 Macpherson Constitution was now where the details of the administrative and political structures were carved out.
Okay.
The Littleton Constitution, which I think was the last under the colonial era, gave room for the three regions: the North, the East, and the West, to come into play. And from there on, the next talk was now independence. So
Independence
that was
from Britain.
Yes, from Britain.
Okay.
Yes. So whereas you had real political activists like Nnamdi Azikiwe, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Chief Obafemi Awolowo for Action Group in the West, you had the Sadaun of Sokoto, Sir Ahmadu Bello in the North, pioneering these moves. The Southerners were keen to get this act done. In fact, 1956, Anthony and I were a very young boy at that time in Action Group, have moved the motion for independence, but the North refused. They refused. They said they were not ready, and that the South was more educated and would fill in all the civil service positions and what have you. They needed time, and that if the rush was going to be there, they would rather not be part of Nigeria. And so the British government, always very soft towards the North, because they see them as a bit more amenable to their thinking than the stubborn Southerners. So they repeatedly kept pandering to the Northern whims and caprices. More population, granted them. More seats in the House of Parliament, granted them. More this and more that, until they felt satisfied enough to then say, okay.
So when you say independence from the British, what independent from what? Because didn't the British want to still rule Nigeria, or why would they agree to independence?
They would agree to independence because, and it wasn't only Nigeria. Ghana, for instance, got theirs in 1956 with Kwame Nkrumah as their head of state, when in fact it was Zik, having been studied in America in Lincoln University with a master's, came back and went to Ghana as a journalist, that influenced a young Nkrumah into coming to America for further studies. He also influenced others. You know our friend Mbadiwe, Bono, Jike, Greg Dad and all, you know. So a lot of them were Foris who were influenced by Zik. So they now had activists. Osita Abuna of Enugu, for instance, who later became the royal father there, even ended up in prison, agitating. So when natives begin this form of agitation, it pays you not to go into internecine war. It's not necessary. So you negotiate your terms of granting independence. And the British colonies didn't get it as bad as the French ones. The French literally took away all their rights, tied it to France. Okay, but not the British. But what the British did was therefore to manipulate the system such that at any point in time, they will still be able to influence policies in Nigeria, which became very obvious, for instance, during the war. But here you go, Adana, it's called national interest.
Fair enough.
So there's a limit to blaming, the blame game. Every country wants the best for her citizens. If you don't want the best for yourselves, that's tough luck. And that's one of the biggest lessons we need to learn. So Britain is still looking after themselves, whether it's from Nigeria or Ghana or Australia or New Zealand or Canada, or, you know, these are policies, trade policies, you know, you strike what is best. So these were all the constitutional provisos that brought us to the 1960, where independence was given. And the Northern People's Congress of the North, again, had produced the majority. You know, I said it was always working their way. And the Prime Minister, which is the executive arm of government, was filled by Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa from Bauchi. It could have been Sadwana of Sokoto, but he opted to remain the premier up north to control what was going up north, and he allowed Tafawa Balewa to go to the federal, to the center in Lagos, to assume the position of the prime minister. Nnamdi Azikiwe became a ceremonial president. The powers lay with Tafawa Balewa. Now, that was the position at independence. Now came the elections. That election of 1959 that heralded the 1960 government, come to think of it, October 1, 1960. So in another 2 days, it'll be celebration. Okay, good. Fair enough. These things do fly. Okay. The action group did not win at the national. And that was a big blow to Chief Obafemi Awolowo, a very erudite politician. So he had allowed his deputy, Ladoke Akintola, to assume premiership of Western Nigeria, whilst he became leader of opposition in the federal parliament. Understand what I'm telling you now? Because we are now going towards what led to that first coup. The first coup, the 1966 coup, when the military struck for the first time. Now, Ladoke Akintola as premier had his eyes more to the center.
Center of what?
Federal.
Okay.
Which now meant aligning with the Northern People's Congress. That's the Sadwana, Tafawa Balewa, and co. He was Western Nigeria. Awolowo had other ideas. Both old friends and political allies didn't see eye to eye. There was an ideological difference. There was a shift. And the end result was that the elections became a source of a total mess. And for the first time, real violence was introduced into the Nigerian politics. And it's called Operation Wetie.
Operation what? Wetie?
Yes, which is wet him.
Okay.
Or wet her.
Wet her. Wetie. Okay.
Yeah. Wet is the English bit. Then the vernacular is the E with a soft dot. Pronounced Wetie. So political violence and opponents will go around dousing each other with inflammable liquids and setting people ablaze.
Oh my goodness. And this was between
the action group.
The action group, which is led by Obafemi Awolowo.
And Ladipo Akintola.
Okay.
They had factionalized completely. Okay. And now Ladipo Akintola had gone and formed NNDP, which was a different party from the action group. So these were now the two combatants.
Wow.
And the Western crisis, as it's known, was so vicious that law and order broke down completely. It broke down completely, compelling a motion to be moved in Parliament by the Prime Minister calling for a state of emergency. So in Western Nigeria. So the Prime Minister moved that motion. The Minister of Finance then, Okutiebo, seconded the motion, and they introduced a state of emergency in Western Nigeria, which meant now they dissolved Parliament.
Okay.
That was the riotous state in Nigeria, barely a few years into the nascent democracy, that got the military to step in.
I see.
And that was the 15th January coup, the first coup.
What year?
1966.
January 15th, 1966.
January 15th, 1966. We heard martial music for the first time on radio.
What music?
Martial music.
Okay.
It's military music.
What does it sound like?
Pam 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 pam.
Okay.
And we said, "What's this?"
Wow.
Then some calm voice will come and tell you about. We have come in light of deteriorating situation in the country to remove the profiteers and the looters and the this and that, very corrective. Every military coup is very corrective. So we used to think or believe. 58 years down the line, we know better. Okay.
Right.
Now, so that's why they struck. And it was a bloody coup. They call it the 5 majors. 1 Yoruba and 4 Igbos, the majors. But no, that wasn't it at all. There were a whole lot more.
Right.
In the northern end, they had more of other ranks of northern origin. And in the south, they had Igbos in majority and Yorubas. And that's how they struck. It was a very unfortunate period in Nigeria. And what happened, therefore, from then to 1970, the primary roles played by these military chaps obviously has left the country where we are till today. But guess what? They were all between the ages of 26, 28, thereabouts.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like
the oldest when he was killed was Ironsi, the head of state, General Ironsi, and he was just 42. All other principal actors General Ojukwu, go on. I don't want to keep naming all of them now, but they were all between 28 and 33. Go on was the head of state.
Interesting.
So were they matured enough to have dabbled into these things at that level of play? Hindsight will suggest that the answer is no. A lot of exuberance would have gone into it. So you had these measures that carried out the coup, but the coup was initially successful, but not from the measures viewpoint, because some officers stopped it. In the north was the commander of the 5th Battalion in Kanu, called Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumewu Ojukwu, frustrated the northern end, so that Nzogwu had to get out of the scene. In the south, the commander-in-chief, the chief of staff, General Agui Ironsi, frustrated the southern end. So they say Igbo coup, but come on, 2 Igbo officers frustrated the coup.
When you say frustrate, what were they doing?
Well, these people wanted to take over government, obviously, and install whoever. And there's an idea as to whom they wanted to install, because some of them were university graduates from UI. And it was during the Cold War, so understood Marxism and Leninism and socialism and things like that. And they had a soft spot as things are evolving, really, for Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who at that point in time had been incarcerated by the Balewa regime under a guise of treasonable felony, and he was in Calabar prison. That's how history has been evolving.
Interesting.
Very unfortunate coup, because...
Did they kill people?
Oh, they killed people. And it was a sorry thing. Majorly Sadan of Sokoto, a revered, almost deified head, a Fulani, lost his life with his wife. Akintola, whom I just mentioned, the premier, was killed. Festus Okotiebo, who seconded the motion for state of emergency in the West, moved by Balewa, was killed. And some other military officers. Total casualty was like 22. But it was seen as lopsided because they didn't see any Igbo premier lose his life. Okay, the Eastern premier, Opera, Dr. Michael Opera, did not die. So the thing became, oh, wow, was this partial? But again, history, no, the archives have shown that a Lieutenant Oguchi was sent. Okay, there was Chudesoki that was to play the eastern part, but was posted out on a course. So Lieutenant Oguchi took the place of Chudesoki, who had gone on course on short notice. On his way to Enugu, his car broke down. And by the time eventually they got to Dr. Opera, it was at the Enugu airport, and he had a guest, international, the president of Cyprus, Archbishop Makarios.
Okay.
You know, the Greek Orthodox in their black hoods, bearded, they were startled. So that failed, even though Opera was later arrested. Okay, so that was the 1966 coup, a very sorry affair that has haunted Nigeria, is still haunting Nigeria, which is why people should be careful about this subject matter, because you got to be careful about the sensitivity of other people's sensitivities.
Right.
Yes. So, did it end there? No. When the casualty list came out and insensitivity as to all of that apparently also was sensed, it led to something else. And that was the May pogrom. Pogrom is a genocide, it's a killing. So in May, there was a retaliatory killing of people of Eastern origin, mostly Igbos up north. And that was the first terrible killing by the masses, the citizens.
People were angry that their own premiers were killed.
Yes, and yours alive,
Right,
kind of.
right.
Nobody had time to go into details.
Interesting.
So they took it out on the masses. And that was the first pogrom. Northern-based Igbos came back, and there was a lot of reassurance. And so they went back.
Reassurance from who?
From the Eastern government.
To go back to the north?
Yes, that all has been settled. The regional governors, military governors this time around, we are meeting. Okay, so these assurances were given, and they went back. Now, on July 29, 1966, the military reprisal took place, and that cost the life of the head of state, General Ironsi. He was killed in Ibadan. He went to the west, Ibadan was capital then, to visit, and the military governor then, Colonel Faji, was his host when the soldiers struck. And Faji will not give up on his commander-in-chief. So he paid the supreme price. They killed him, they killed Ironsi.
Wow.
And then the casualty list of all the top army officers, and all, mostly of Igbo extraction, killed, and others came to about 240. That's the record.
Interesting.
So it was terribly, terribly bloody. It was a bloody reprisal that cut deep into the fabric of military esprit de corps.
And all of this was just to take over the government. So they've come into power, they're eliminating everyone who's there so they can come into power.
Yes, this was as of July 29th.
Okay.
And their angst was, of course, the killings of January 15, 1966, that same year, plus the fact that their suspicion about the lopsided nature and the Igbo influence was doubled because of the unitary decree passed by unadvisedly by General Ironsi, the head of state. The unitary, you see, military system observes a hierarchy, okay, chain of command.
Right.
So a regional concept is very diverse to a military concept. They'd rather have one straight-jacketed thing. So he collapsed the regional thing of Littleton's constitution that had Northern region, Western region, Eastern region. And in 1963, a fourth region was added, Midwest.
So let me take you back just a little bit. So obviously the coup happened. They, eliminated a bunch of leaders. The pogrom happened from the north.
May 29th.
May 29th. Mm-hmm. And then who killed Ironsi?
That's the July 29th military coup. That's the second
This
coup.
is a different coup now.
Different.
And who did that consist of?
That consisted of the northern military officers.
Okay.
Doing a reprisal killing of of Eastern officers,
Okay. So
mostly Igbos.
So even within the military, there's a lot of division even there, is what I'm hearing.
That's why I said that the esprit de corps in the military took a bashing.
Okay.
Yes. So that 29 July coup that eliminated the head of state and other top military officers of East, mostly Igbo origin, enthroned Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon as the new head of state. Now, for Ojukwu, who was a colonel, he thought that a military hierarchy, it wasn't the turn of Yakubu Gowon to take mantle of leadership, because they had Brigadier Ogundipe ought to be the person. So that was the first point of departure between the two fellow officers. Now one head of state, the other the premier, military governor of Eastern region. And there it remained until September 29th. And the ultimate genocide took place in the north, where at least clearly numbered 30,000 Igbos, men, women, children were hacked to death.
30,000?
Yes, and another 1 million plus totally brutalized, injured in various degrees.
Oh my goodness.
And when they arrived, those that survived, arrived Eastern region, this entire history came ramming home on people, both old and young alike.
Wow. So this second program that happened,
yes,
what caused the angst?
A spillover. You've bloodletting.
Was there a particular trigger?
There was no further trigger. It was just now a build-up of anger, supported obviously by the system up there. Okay, so when you indoctrinate people and whip them up, at some point, look at the dates, 29 this, 29 this, 29 that, okay? They unleashed. But nobody has seen anything like that in Black Africa. It was horrible. And I'm telling you that all this thing about military, you see, before all of this time, nobody really saw the military. They didn't exist. We didn't know about the police. We used to have Empire Day during the colonial period before independence. School children would go marching in the stadium. And that's when you then saw the military band. Just the military band with their big drum going boom, boom, boom. Finish. And out they went. They never configured in the psyche of the people. And so suddenly the train arrives, Port Harcourt, and the alarm bell rings, the school bell rings, which is odd. At that point in time, then we assembled and we are told that in the next half an hour, we'll vacate some of our dorms.
Wow.
Brandeis House, Florida House, a baby house. We said, for what? They said, please, just make sure your bed is the way it is. Don't take anything except things in your locker, okay? And will you begin to make shift, sleep two in a bed, sort of thing. We need the dorms. And then the first set arrived. Amputated arms, gouged eyes. Those that had two full eyes weren't even crying for missing two legs or one leg or one hand. Or they had this shock. They were gazing into, they were stargazing into nothingness.
How old were you at the time?
I was 16. I was 16
wow.
and a half. 16 and a half. I was in Form 5.
Having to witness
Yes,
all
so
of that.
every person that saw all of that for the first time knew that something was wrong. You see, when military boys have their coup, it's really a secret. It's between a few persons, otherwise it will fail.
Right.
So this whole speed of development, of deterioration and all was such a shock to a very innocent civilian populace, more so in the East, where we never experienced any form of violence. It was in the West, not in the East. Okay, so here we are. That's it. From then on, the Eastern landscape altered for good.
Wow.
Because then Igbos were now being driven from all over Nigeria, as it were. There were no positions. They were internally displaced people. So the civil servants needed to be fitted in somewhere. All sorts of workers, students from the north arriving from all over the whole place, the west, had to be fitted into classrooms. We now started sharing class chairs and things like that. So something had gone horrendously wrong.
Right.
But they were still talking. The military governors, the regional heads, and the federal government were still talking. The federal government was now being governed by the Supreme Military Council. So they were still talking. And there was one last chance to avert final crisis. And they all met on the invitation of General Ankara of Ghana, the head of state then, at a place called Aburi in Ghana. Okay. My driver is from there, so it's really pronounced. They call it Eburi, but A-B-U-R-I. Okay. We call it Aburi. They call it Eburi, but that's where they met. The federal government and all the regional military governors and their secretaries to government met in Ghana. And between the 4th and 5th of January 1967, as God will have it, they came to an agreement. It's called, historically now, it's called the Aburi Accord or Aburi Agreement. And when Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, the military governor of Eastern Nigeria, came back and it was announced the terms of the agreement, there was absolute jubilation. It was a serious relief to everyone. At last, sensibility was now at play. And what was the agreement? They had agreed that, the Supreme Military Council will be recognized. The Supreme Military Council will have the powers of appointing senior officers of the army, the police, and positions in the civil service, senior ones, in foreign affairs and consular services, things like that, recognized. To that any decision to be taken by the SMC must first, where necessary, be vetted by the other 4 military governors of the 4 regions of the North, East, Midwest, and West. And they all agreed to it before it's passed into law. And then also 3 key things. And then that all the decree passed prior to 15th of January 1966 or post 15th January 1966 detracting from the powers of the regional governments. You know, I told you there was a unitary government provision, that all that will be abrogated and the powers of the regions will be restored.
Okay.
In other words, back to status quo ante. People were happy because regional government actually meant, to a large extent, regional autonomy, agriculture, education, so many things, you know, which, believe you me, as they're talking restructuring today in Nigeria, 58 years, nearly 60 years later, 58 years later, is still the same talk. So they were very happy. Now, this was January. Now, the decree promulgating this into law was now being awaited. January went by. February went by. Then March 1967, the draft of that decree, number 8, had come out, gotten to Government House in Enugu. They took a look at it, and it didn't reflect
what was discussed.
Yes, some of the agreements were there, but there's the clause 70, number 70 and 71 had detracted completely from this core agreement. And what that thing did was that now, now it said that the Supreme Military Council will allow for the head of state, if he concedes, with 3 regional governors to declare a state of emergency. Not 4 regional governors, not the, we will all vet and agree. So if any 3 agrees, the 4th one is out. And then also that under that state of emergency, the head of state, with the acquiescence of any 3, can therefore dictate policies and administer the other region. In other words...
And we're talking the west, the south, the north.
No, you're talking the north, the east, the west, and the Midwest.
Right.
Midwest is present Delta and Edo states.
Gotcha.
The premier then was Sir Dr. Dennis Osadebe from Asaba. And so that's it. So in one fell swoop, they took away all the understanding, all the agreement, put to the East and the government of the East in a spot. In other words, the Aburi Accord failed.
Right.
The mantra from 27th of March 1967 in the East became, "On Aburi we stand." On Aburi we stand. On Aburi we stand. That draft eventually was signed in Benin City. That's where it was signed, and that was it. By May 27th, what amounted to a masterstroke took place, which was that 12 states were created in Nigeria. 6 up north, 6 down south. But in the south, you had the eastern region, for instance, that was one homogeneous entity, broken down into 3. East Central State, River State, and the Southeastern State. Rivers is rivers, you know, the south is the present Akwa Ibom, Cross Rivers and things like that. These are the minority areas that had always clamored for their own autonomy.
Okay.
In 1956, on the Riceman formula, they tried it, it did not work. So now, it's come on a platter of gold in 1967. So in anticipation of sorts, the East was fractionalized. And on 30th of May, barely 3 days thereafter, all this now build up being the last straw, because Aburi was the last straw. The failure of it led to the Civil War.
Oh.
That's the last straw that broke the camel's back. On May 30th, 1967, the Republic of Biafra was declared. And on July the 6th, 1967, the federal government of Nigeria declared a police action. Police action. That's what they declared. And shortly thereafter, it became a full-blown war.
I mean, I've never really heard the story end to end as to like how this came about. So this has been a really great education on all the timelines and the horrors that ensued, you know, in or that led to the Civil War. I would love to get into your experiences again. I know that you sort of touched on it with the people just coming back into Port Harcourt with amputated arms and legs and just the horrors around it. I know that we're pretty pushing it on this episode, so we'll probably have to move to another episode to discuss that. But I'd love to hear about your personal experiences and just during the war, the aftermath, and how all of that worked.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah. You want to hear it now or what?
Yeah, we'll reconvene for another. But in the meantime, learning about Ndi Igbo, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on BookBaby. We'll put the link down below so you can go purchase. But thank you, Daddy, for answering some of these questions so far. But we'll see you guys in a little bit.
Thank you very much. You know, it's a lot of juggling the brain. You know, the timeline, dates, things like that. Absolutely. You know. But you know, that's it, Adana. We've never talked this,
right?
Okay, but we started talking.
Yes. Yeah.
But there are lessons to all this. I told you, see the age bracket of all the combatants, all those involved at such level, and I can assure you that before all of this, say like the Eastern region, for instance, had the fastest growing economy in the whole world. Nigeria was very healthy. Groundnut pyramids up north, the cocoa in the west, and the palm oil of the east, plus other discoveries, coal, tin, what have you. But these are talks.
Right.
So a nation ought to be learning from history. Nigeria ought to have learned from history. But you will be surprised to know that the war ended on the 15th of January 1970. But there's been like 5 military coups thereafter. We can get into that later.
All right. All right. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much. I hope this helps.